Good afternoon. It is time for me to update you on Module 2. I'm in the process of finishing up grading the discussion, and overall I've been really pleased. I'm really liking what I'm seeing. You guys have thoughtful comments in here. It's great. Let's see. Let me start with a little bit of housekeeping before I start directly addressing the Module 2 assignment. So one very minor point, exercise, as in, is it a good idea for economists to exercise their normative opinions? With an O. That means to eject something, like The Exorcist ejects a demon from the girl's soul in the movie. Another little thing, just sort of more of a writing point than anything else. When we have a conversation with people, it's easy to make the mistake of mixing up quantity demanded with demand. But when it's written down, it becomes that much harder. So just be careful with that. This jargon trap that we fall into. We pick it up in context, but in written form, it's just harder to understand. For the personally verified knowledge question 2 of the assignment, a few people didn't do that, but a lot of people answered, and that was an interesting thing. And I'll go to that in just a second. But one thing that you're going to see change the rough estimate of the knowledge that you personally verified. I really like that question, and next time I teach this class, I want that to be a discussion question. So, this is the first time I've been teaching this class as an asynchronous class, so thanks in advance for being patient. Things might change as we go through, and this is a little change that I intend to make before I forget, is moving some things around like that. So the deadline is passed. I'm not obviously expecting you to go back in time and change your answers, but if you see stuff change in the class, especially stuff from past modules, that's just me preparing for the future. All right. Let's start with your answers to that second question, and then I'll go through my responses based on or in light of what I've been seeing in y'all's responses. And then also, actually, let me also quickly say on the discussion assignments, again, mostly great. There were some scores I gave this week that were lower than I would like to see. So if your score was relatively low there, go into the grading rubric for this. If you click this link here, this will give you an idea of what I'm looking for, and this will give you hints on how to score higher points. Now the lowest 3 get dropped, so don't sweat it. It's not a big deal, but it's me prodding you in hopefully the right direction. So your answers to how much personally verified knowledge have you got? What have you verified yourself? I did see a bunch of answers that thought, okay, well, I see it, or I experiment with it, or I do a Google search. The Google search is not verification. It is relying on the authority of Google to give you the authority of the web results. So something like Wikipedia is a pretty reliable collective authority on a lot of things. So it's not to say that Googling stuff is not a good and useful way to get information, but it is not the same thing as verifying something with an experiment, right? Googling does gravity exist is not the same thing as replicating Galileo's experiments, for example. So some numbers, 60 to 70%, 25%, 90 to 95% from one student. Another student said 99%. Both of those had interesting comments I'll come back to in a sec. 75%, 70%, 15 to 20, 25 to 30. There's basically a few clusters here. So very common is around 25%. Very common is around 70, 75%. Some people go all the way to like 90, 95, 99%, and then some people closer to 0%. So one was explicitly close to 0%, and that's about where I would put myself as well. Uh, One of my favorites was 1.24%, and this student did really clever Fermi piano tuner thinking on this. They figured, okay, I only learned stuff in school, let's just assume that. That's a reasonable, simplifying assumption to start for something like this. You can modify it from that point, but this student says, okay, assume I only learn in school. I've been in school for 20,160 hours in my life. They're taking 16 times however many hours a week times however many weeks a year, and then asking how many science projects or research papers did I have to write? About 10. How long did those take? About 25 hours each. And so by dividing 25 into 20,000, they got about 1.24%. This is great back of the envelope thinking, right? So if we really sat down and, really pulled apart this line of thinking, there'd be plenty to quibble about. But as a way to start thinking about something, it is, excellent. Chef's kiss to that one. Very similar reasoning from another student gave an answer of 70%, right? So just because you have a good line of reasoning doesn't mean it's going to get the right answer. But this isn't about getting the right answer. It's about a ballpark. And it's about thinking about something in sort of a general, quick and dirty way. Now, why do I put myself to the lower end of that spectrum? Well, let me start with a counter argument. So one of the students arguing 90 to 95%, my initial response is, whoa, that is crazy. But they follow up with something very important, which is some examples of tacit knowledge. So one thing that we learn from experience and we verify is the layout of your own home. That's not something that you can Google, right? It's not something that you can rely on an authority to tell you. You don't just trust that someone says this. You go through the house and you learn it. And a lot of our knowledge is like this, right? A lot of knowledge is like how to ride a bike. Now, quantifying knowledge is kind of a weird exercise to begin with, right? So one thing I hope you get out of this is the sense that quantifying knowledge is weird, right? It's not really something you can add up the way you can add up bushels of corn, right? Adding up facts without context is kind of meaningless. And it's hard to compare something like, well, knowledge of how to ride a bike versus knowledge that there are 8 planets in the solar system plus a dwarf celestial body or whatever Pluto is. So there's not a right answer here. Wide range of answers is totally reasonable. Why do I put myself closer to the bottom? Well, most of the things I know I got from someone else. Now let me push aside tacit knowledge for a second, right? How to drive, how to ride a bike, how to do physical things. A lot of that sort of knowledge you can only get by going through the motions yourself and kind of, verifying through observation and experiment. But pushing that aside, all the other stuff, all the book knowledge, all the stuff, that I'm getting out of those bookshelves, well, I'm getting out of the bookshelves, right? Or I learned in a class, a teacher or a professor taught me something. Some of those things I went and verified, right? Or some classes, we had a science project where we directly verified something. But more often, it's just I get a pile of facts in school, I cram them into my brain, get a pile of facts from a newspaper, and they just sit there, and maybe I forget them, maybe I misremember them, but they're from someone else. They aren't from me directly, getting this. One comment someone had is, very important, which is there's just too much to know. There is way more than we could possibly verify ourselves. All right, so let's jump to question 1. Actually, let's see. Yeah, we talked about that. Cool, yeah. Back to question 1. Question 2, I feel good about. So question 1 is our check plus question. So I'm not necessarily looking for a deep essay on the difference between inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning, but I want to see an answer along the lines of, we just can't be sure because it's in the future. So our big thing here, we cannot deduce that the sun will rise tomorrow. So let's compare the question, will the sun rise tomorrow, to 2 different questions. So one is very different. We find out Jeff's coming to dinner. Jeff is our friend who's a vegetarian, and we ask, will Jeff appreciate the steak I made for him? We can deduce the answer is no because we know something, and from that fact follows a conclusion. We know if Jeff is vegetarian and you offer him a steak, he will not appreciate it. We can follow that line of reasoning, and maybe it turns out he's no longer a vegetarian, and so our conclusion changes, but the structure of the argument is valid. If he's a vegetarian and I offer him a steak, he will not like it. Right? That is deductive thinking. We're starting from something general, which is vegetarians don't want to eat steak, and honing into something specific. Jeff won't like that steak. Now let's consider an alternative. So let's say you're thinking about a 6 or 7-year-old. They've had a lot of different candy, and every type of candy they've had, they've enjoyed. Some they like more than others, but they get candy, they always like it. What if you promise to give them black licorice? Will they like it? Well, black licorice is a candy. From their perspective, they would induce candy good, that candy was good, this candy was good, that candy was good, new candy, it's going to be good. From the experience of someone with more experience with black licorice, I would expect the 6-year-old is not going to like the black licorice. It is candy, it does have sugar in it. Some black licorice is more sugary than others. But the point of inference is a way to make a reasonable guess, but there's no guarantee that it's going to be true. Right? So maybe the sun rises tomorrow, maybe it doesn't. It's certainly reasonable to say it's been rising for however many billions of years at this point, and nobody on the news has told us that there's a meteor coming to destroy Earth or anything like that, or a black hole or whatever. It's a reasonable guess, right? There's a 1 in a bajillion chance that it doesn't rise. There's an almost 100% chance that it does rise tomorrow. But fundamentally, we cannot deduce that. We cannot be 100% certain because it just doesn't necessarily follow, right? We have good reason to believe, but reason to believe is not the same thing as certainty. We cannot be sure the sun will rise tomorrow. There's also some other things here. We might verify that it rises tomorrow, but then there's another tomorrow. There's also the possibility that I verify that it rises, but I can't verify if it doesn't rise. Right? So when I say the sun rises tomorrow, I basically mean the world doesn't end. So there were a couple of clever answers about being near the poles. So yeah, if you're in northern Norway during the summer, the sun doesn't set. Or if you're in Antarctica, the sun doesn't rise during the same time. I'm not thinking about that. Thinking more in the sense of, will the Earth, go through some catastrophic event? Okay, I can verify that it didn't go through a catastrophic event yesterday, but if there is a catastrophic event, I can't verify the other side of things. So there's also a weird little asymmetry in here. But really, in the grand scheme of things, there's maybe a 1 in a bajillion chance that something bad happens, but that's enough to be not 100%. All right, to the point of stepping into the same river twice, a lot of you guys picked up on the basic idea of holding all else constant. This is a nice metaphor for this because, yeah, it is true that the river changes and the person's putting foot into the river changes. But at the same time, the river, does it change, right? So we know the Mississippi changes where it is, but it is always still the Mississippi, even if it isn't the same Mississippi. There's not really an answer here. There's not an easy answer here. We're kind of getting philosophical on this point. But the big idea kind of behind the scenes, or the relationship to the law of demand, really boils down to ceteris paribus. Any law in social science, this is a thing that is always and everywhere true, right? Not a regularity, not a rule of thumb. A law. The law of demand is true because it's a law because it's always true, and it's always true because we assume all else held equal, including the person going into the river and the river itself. The atoms have changed, time has changed. In real life, we can't hold all else equal, but as a matter of modeling things, as a matter of trying to wrap our head around more complicated issues, we at least attempt to, but there is kind of an art to it. So I don't have an easy answer for you, and I have even less of an answer for question 4. Can we get rid of our normative opinions? Can we separate our opinions from our analysis? Is it possible? Is it a good idea? And I saw good arguments in both directions, and I think that there are good arguments in both directions. On the one hand, in a perfect world, we would like to be as transparent as possible. On the other hand, sometimes there are big issues, and we owe it to humanity to push hard in one direction. Sometimes we have to be advocates. If there is, think Don't Look Up, that movie from a couple years ago, meteors coming towards Earth, you might have a compelling case to misstate and overstate things if people aren't listening to you in a case like that. Now, that said, that is going to cost you credibility in different settings, right? So if you are an economist and when you write in public, you say the world is coming to an end, that's going to hurt your reputation among economists. In practice, social scientists in general will tend to sort of specialize. They'll see more public-facing and less public-facing. But in any case, is it a good idea? Well, yeah, there's certainly an argument for we're going to be more honest and we're going to be able to think through things a little bit more easily if it's less emotionally charged. Now, is it possible? I can get a little bit more precise here. So we try our best to pull our value judgments out of our analysis, usually, and we're even usually pretty effective at it, but it still can sneak in. At the very least, we always basically come at our analyses with the assumption that humans have some moral worth. So we might decide to tweak things and say, let's count the impact on poor people as more important than the impact on rich people. So, for example, the changes in or the issues going around local zoning laws in California right now in early 2023, a lot of the Bay Area is losing their power to enforce zoning law restrictions because their city plans haven't allowed for enough growth of affordable housing. So economists definitely will build in the assumption that people matter, and we might tweak things to say let's skew our analysis to be especially concerned about the most vulnerable populations. Even something like thinking about efficiency, we do a pretty good job of kind of kicking the can down the road. We think the value that matters is the value to the decision maker, not the value to me, right? So if you spend $10 on something, I infer that you got more than $10 on that thing, even if it's not something that I'm into, right? Economists are good with, it's fine if you're into it. But even saying that you're into it matters, that's, a bigger GDP figure in that sense matters in some way, is bringing some normative element into it. Now, it's really low stakes saying humans matter. But is it possible to entirely exclude normative opinions from our analysis? I think in the limit we can get close, but there's always going to be something, right? There's always going to be something for the philosophers to quibble over. All right, so like I said, you guys have been doing great so far. Also, like I said, this is my first time doing this asynchronously, so I've been kind of nervous, but you guys have been doing great. So keep it up. As usual, if you have questions, let me know in the usual places, and I will talk to you in the future.